Hey everybody, how's it going? Adam Mason on the Bearded Tog podcast. Today I'm super excited to talk to one of my good friends, Louise. She's a photographer based in DC that specializes in weddings, but does a lot of editorial and branding and just kind of marketing work as well, which I know a lot of you are trying to get into. And she's just really fun and just does so many different things in her business. She shares a ton of insight in this episode. And so really excited for this episode today. Just a little bit of news. Make sure that you can support the podcast by going to our Patreon. There is a link in our show notes for that. That's where I just posted like all the hashtags I use for weddings and why I use those and what I think you should use. So I just posted those in Patreon. So that's something kind of cool. And posting some gear and some other insider tips, if you will, if you want to support the podcast. Or you can leave a review on iTunes, which would be super cool and fun to read. And yeah, super excited to have Lauren on. All about systemization today and branding. So kind of like what communication and how do you make clients feel from your system, but then from the actual interaction with the client, but then also how is everything presented when it comes to the actual brand and like the external, the everything we see, which is really cool. So without any further ado, here's Lauren. Lauren, how's it going?
Hey, Adam, what's up?
Starting podcasts always sounds like really weird, and it's like, hello, Arthur. Well, hey, DW, like what's going on? But
and I think everybody knows that we were chatting before, so it's like
yeah,
kind
totally,
of
yeah.
screwed.
No, absolutely. Every single guest on the show, it's like we talk a little bit pre-show because I never want somebody to feel like they signed on and immediately we jumped in, and so it's
that
always
would be
kind of
terrible.
awkward. Yeah. Like you have people eating, you have babies crying.
Right.
Like I've had a few moms on the podcast now, like Caitlin James. So it's just like, you never know what's happening. So, awesome. So yeah, we've been friends a while and I love your work and, we've gotten to hang out a little bit, not as much at the end of last year because we were both swamped. We're just sad. We have to change that. But, I just want to start out a little bit. Tell me more about yourself and, everybody knows that you're a DC wedding photographer. We've talked about that in the pre-show. And I just want to, how did you come to DC? Why did you get into photography? And what is the reason that you still do photography now?
Yeah, sure. So after college, I joined the AmeriCorps, which is kind of like the domestic Peace Corps, which is great and fun. And they kind of place you in a new area. So I was moved to West Palm Beach. The downfall of AmeriCorps is that you don't get paid very much. You just get a living stipend. So I actually took up photography as a sort of like just to supplement my income. And I was really young at the time. So really it was more like just so I could have some spending money for the weekends. And so that's kind of how I got into it. I was completely self-taught, a lot of YouTube videos, a lot of really nice, kind people willing to answer my very, very juvenile questions. And so I lived in Florida for a little while. I started to realize like, hey, this is actually something I really enjoy. And this is probably a pretty good moneymaker. And AmeriCorps had ended and I got a job teaching photography, believe it or not, at a high school, which I liked well enough. But I found myself spending so much of my time and energy towards my business. And so I eventually decided after 3 years of teaching, so this didn't happen overnight. I did teach and have my full-time wedding photography business at the same time for about 3 years. I wanted to have enough savings for a full year, just in case I crashed and burned. And I was also moving to a new city at the time. So not only was I starting a full-time business, quitting my steady income, having a full-time wedding business, but I was also moving to a new city now where I live now, Washington, D.C. with Adam. And so it was really scary. So I made sure I had enough money in the bank to make sure, just in case. And so I moved to D.C. 2 years ago, actually like today, I think. Which is kind of crazy. Yeah. I had actually met somebody while I was shooting a wedding in Maryland like 4 years ago. And we actually did long distance while I was in Florida for those first 2 years. So that was one of the reasons, that I decided to move to DC. Besides the fact that I hate the heat, I know everyone's like, you're crazy, the Sunshine State's beautiful, but I hate the heat, and my parents still live in New York. That's where I'm from, and I wanted to be just closer to them and back in more of like an urban area. So I moved here 2 years ago, and turns out I didn't need that money I saved. Thank God. I remember when I first moved here, I thought I was going to have to like drive for Lyft, and I applied to work at a restaurant as a bus person, which makes me like laugh to this day because I got in trouble on my first day for being on my phone. And I was like, okay, this isn't going to work. But luckily I didn't need any of those things. I did develop a really awesome network here, and Adam, of course, you're part of that. And big shout out to Elizabeth Carberry, who hired me before I even moved here to shoot an event at Shinola without even having known me. And I just think that that's always the nicest thing ever. And she's so well connected, and I owe a lot of my first year success to her. And so here I am. I shoot about 20 weddings a year. We just hired an associate, which is super awesome. And I'm sure we can talk about that at some point.
That's awesome. So that's kind of crazy that like you could, one, that love made you move here. That's kind of hilarious. And then
I know.
What, you don't have to go into too much detail, but like, how did you meet a photographer and like to even get connected with your first gig here? Like, what was that process, or did you cold call people? Like,
Sure.
What were you doing on that effort side of things?
So Elizabeth is an event planner here, and I had joined the Tuesdays Together group on Facebook. And I think I just posted a little bit about myself, letting people know that I was coming to the area. And I did do a lot of, I guess, the modern day cold calling is cold emailing, of just like, hey, like, help me. I am pretty good at what I do. Here's my work. Willing to do some bartering at first, just so, we can develop some trust. And yeah, that's it. I think that Rising Tide group, the Tuesdays Together group in DC was really helpful. People seem to be really receptive of newcomers, which is really nice. And so one of the things that I tried to do this year was really focus on, sort of giving back and helping other folks that are trying to find their niche here in DC.
I love that. That's awesome. We talk about Rising Tide, I feel like, almost every other episode on this podcast. And there's like two camps. There are people who know what it is, and they're like, yeah, I love it. It's great, blah, blah, blah. And if you say Natalie Frank, they're like, oh, yeah, Natalie. And then there are other folks that are like, is that girly group on Facebook? And I totally could easily be in that camp if I wasn't, cautious. But I don't know. I got into it, and it's been great. And Rising Tide, man, it really can help.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, it can help. I think it can.
Yeah, I think it's like a little bit easier than it's just another way, essentially. At least from the Facebook side of things, it's been super helpful, just meeting people. And I think that's kind of how you and I connected, as far as I remember, we saw each other in the group. So awesome.
Definitely.
Very cool. So now you're in DC, and how are things going? Like, you're full time. I've seen your office space. It looks super cool. You have an associate.
Thank you.
Like, what do you think what is going on for you here in 2017, 2018, and what do you want to do more of?
Yeah. So last year I focused on creating systems for my business. I went to a workshop with my mentor, Robert J. Hill. He's a freaking kick-ass photographer out on the West Coast. He was my mentor. He does these like year-long mentorships. So you basically have him sort of at his beck and call, or at my beck and call, I guess, for any questions I have. And then you also get to meet up with him with 10 other photographers for an in-person workshop. And so one of the things that we talked a lot about last year, and something that I really focused on, was creating systems for my business. Systems I found are really important because they show you not only what's working, but what's not working. So if a client comes to me with an issue, or is unhappy about something, I go back to my systems and I say, okay, where in this system did I go wrong that created this problem, and how can I fix it? So that's been really crucial to my success last year. And so moving forward to 2018, like you said, I hired an associate, which is amazing. And right now I'm focusing on creating systems for not only, her set of couples that she takes on, but also systems with, how I interact and communicate with the associate as well. So that's one of my goals. Yeah, that's not about it, but that's it on that.
No worries. That's awesome. Systemization is a big deal. And like, if you need to make sure you have your processes like ironed out, or at least even a process started out, and then say,
Sure.
okay, cool. Like, I'm going to take on this thing. And, oftentimes that's why, like, I talk about there's no such thing as a bad client, which offends a lot of people, but I'm always like, what I didn't communicate well enough,
Yep.
or I didn't ask enough questions, or I didn't investigate, and like wedding couples who are like, oh, our timeline was so weird. And it's, well, could you have set up a meeting to talk about it? What could you
Sure.
have done to? And I think like people forget that if you own a business, like, take ownership, like, you are responsible for this process.
100%.
So I think that's awesome.
The customer is always right, even when they're not.
Yeah. Yeah. Or at least it's like I always try to think of like, what can I do to make things right? What is something that you've systematized this year that you're like, that you really enjoy, or that you really feel like it helped out a lot?
I created a really lengthy questionnaire. I've always had questionnaires, but this is a little bit different. The questionnaire is split into different sections. So you have a section for the bride, a section for the groom, the ceremony, the reception, and then all of the vendors. So once they complete this, I create their wedding day timeline, the first draft, and then we talk about it together. We make any changes. We send it out to the other vendors. If they have a wedding planner, the planner and I work together on this. And that has been just game changing in developing trust. When I show up to a wedding day, there's no like, oh, wait, that's what we're doing. It's always, when I ask them a question, the response is always, whatever you think. Whatever you think is going to get the best photo, because they know that I know. And then I think another reason why I have developed that trust, in addition to creating sort of cultivating the relationship, is that my brand pretty much just exudes weddings. I want to show my couples and my inquiring couples that I am the expert. I might do families, I might do some visual branding stuff, but I want people to know that this is my specialty, and, you can trust me to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to talk to you about your specialties, because I feel I've never seen a bad photo you've taken.
That's probably not true, but you're very nice.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I haven't really gone looking for bad ones, but like, you shoot so many.
On my website.
Yeah. You show so much diversity in your work, as far as like, there's definitely a lot of wedding stuff, and I love that. But I've even seen a lot of your editorial and branding work, and I'm like, oh, this is so cool. This is really neat. Like, you do enjoy doing that stuff though, right? And how do you kind of like, how do you split that time? Is that the ratio that you would like it to be, or would you like to take on more of that and less wedding? Like, what are you kind of thinking of, and how do you keep those separate?
Sure. So, I'll answer the latter first. So to keep it separate, if you notice on my Instagram, actually, except today, I can't believe I'm going to say this. If you look on my Instagram, all of the work, Lauren Louise Photo is weddings.
Shameless plug.
Yes. However, I also have another Instagram account, and I have another website for my other work. So, if you go to laurenlouisephotography.com, it's all weddings. At Lauren Louise Photo on Instagram, all weddings. However, I also recently purchased the domain laurenlouisephoto.com, and that is where all of my other work lives. And there's even a tab on that website that can bring you back to my wedding website as well. And same with my Instagram account. It's Lauren Louise Photo, but with an F instead of a PH. And that is where my editorial work, my visual branding work, a lot of my fashion stuff all lives there. And just, to go back to what I said, I want my wedding couples just to know that this is what I do mostly, this is what I'm really good at, and you can trust me, to have that sort of experience. And then in terms of the ratio, right now I shoot obviously most weddings. However, one of the reasons why I hired an associate, I'm still going to take my 20 weddings. Last year I did 30, which seemed like a little too much for me. It's because I do want to invest some more time into these other genres of art, like editorial and especially visual branding. I do a lot of work for small businesses, professionals, small brands who need photographs for their website and their social media platforms. Even some folks who just want sort of like an updated LinkedIn headshot. And I try to add a little bit of the Lauren Louise photo flair to it. It's not super stale. It's still unique. It's still current and trending.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even your headshots, it's like it doesn't necessarily look like what our parents would think if we think headshot,
sure,
or like a guy that works on Wall Street or something like that. And I think that's important in today's kind of like everybody's an entrepreneur vibe.
Yeah, everybody needs something like that, and you want to stand out among the rest too. And I don't think a studio portrait at Sears is gonna do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah. I'm trying to think of situations where that would work. I always like playing devil's advocate, and I'm like, well, who is this headshot really for? Like, what could, like, who first?
Yeah.
I think the white backdrop and a dorky smile is really the way to go.
My uncle, he used to be the CFO of a financial firm. And even them, I was so excited. They used a photographer who actually got a little bit of them, like, sort of doing what they do, whether it was like meeting with a client, and all their headshots were taken in their office, like at their desk.
That's awesome.
Like, that's really cool. So maybe that really is the way, even for some of the more, cut and dry professional professions.
Totally. Or at least like try and get you like smiling or no tie or just like much more casual. That's awesome.
For sure.
One of the things I love about you and your work and everything is I love just your branding, and I know you had help have and to design it to where it is today, but what is has that evolved? Obviously, like, was there any time when you're like, oh, I don't want to go back and look at what my branding looked like, or and then how did you decide where to go in the direction you have now?
So the branding I had before my brand now was just created by me. It wasn't anything special. I don't have a lot of experience with design or anything like that. And so I chose to hire Maddie Ty Green. Her business is Green Tie Studios. And she's based out of Georgia, but she's actually moving to Portland here soon. And she was incredible. She, like me, was all about systems. She had an incredible questionnaire. And one of the things that I was looking for in a designer was somebody who was able to help me communicate what I wanted. Because I'm not a designer, I felt like I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate what it was I wanted, but I was able to show her, and she was sort of able to reverbalize what I wanted, which was really important to me. And it's been awesome. I have made no changes to it. I don't plan on making any changes to it. One of the most popular compliments or notes I get from people is, I always know it's your work. And I always know that L is yours, which to me, that's the purpose of a really strong brand. I think it's really hard. There are so many photographers out there, especially in the DC area. And there's so many wonderful, talented photographers. And I just sort of asked myself the question, how can I stand out among the rest when I'm surrounded by all this talent? And I think that having a really strong brand presence is a way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like especially in DC and any kind of saturated market, there's always like a ton of photographers, and the photographers are good. Like, that's the thing. There are plenty of good photographers. It's not like there's one that is like the person for people who have money, and then there's the middle class photographer. Like, there are a lot of good photographers in DC, quality wise, that many people would be pleased with. But then it's like, how can we, like, website wise and just branding wise and feel, like, how do you feel when you look at this photographer's work and everything else around it? And that's something that like, in addition to you having good work, it's like it's always presented in this nice, very nice package, and I'm just like, oh, this is cool. And this sounds silly because you're a woman, but like your branding doesn't feel like pink and
Yes.
or teal or anything like that, and nothing
Yeah.
that's wrong with that. But I think it's easier for me to like enjoy your work even more.
Well,
And there are a lot of guys with beards that you shoot,
yeah.
so that's always cool.
Yeah. And just to sort of add on to that, one of the things I really focus on, and all my couples will probably vouch for this, is that I never have a phone call with just the bride. If you want me to shoot your wedding, I'm going to get on the phone with both of you, and you guys are going to get on the crazy Lauren train, or we're not going to do it at all. Because
Right.
when I first started, you show up to all these weddings where the bride is on top of everything. She knows the timeline. She knows what to expect for my brand. But then the groom is he's lost. We've developed no relationship. There's no trust. And the photos feel uncomfortable to me. And so, yeah, I wanted my brand to be really neutral on the gender scale. And to sort of, another piece of the puzzle, I think, to gain trust from the couple.
Totally. No, that makes sense. I do the same thing. It's like,
Yeah,
I don't want to just interact with one side of things. And, when people look at my wedding photos, they look at my face, they care about how, everybody is perceived, and they're like, and so it's like, why couldn't it be the same for, both partners, no matter what we're shooting. So that makes sense. Did you what made you decide to take the leap into hiring a designer to work with your brand? How did you decide that was going to be worth it, if you will? Or, at the time, was it kind of big and scary, or, that's a heavy financial thing, and somebody could easily say like, oh, well, my website's fine. And
sure.
People say that all the time.
Yeah, well, you and I were talking a little bit over email about like one thing I wish more people in the industry did. And I'm always telling my mentees, I do mentor a couple of photographers in the area, that, it takes money to make money. And you can either be sort of this run-of-the-mill photographer who maybe is like hurting for bookings, or you can spend the money, you can invest in yourself and your brand. You can create something really wonderful and create value for the couple. Because my designer, she doesn't just do, my logo and my submarks. She creates my pricing guides. She creates, my questionnaires, like everything that I, put out into the world has a little, touch of my brand. I'm always telling my mentees, like, what you put out into the world becomes your brand. So if you're going to start putting out like really crappy advertisements, that's part of who you are, and that's your brand. If you're going to start only posting, family shoots, but you want to be a wedding photographer, people are going to think that you're a family photographer. So I make conscious decisions all the time about what I'm putting out, even like in my Insta stories, on Instagram. Everything has a little bit of, my brand's flair.
Totally. No, that makes perfect sense. Tell me a little bit more about just, for your associate, like, is your associate adopting your branding? What are some of the things that you've kind of had the ground rules, if you will, that you really wanted when getting an associate? And then how did you determine that it would be profitable for you and, useful for Lauren Louise photography?
Yeah. So, we didn't want couples who maybe didn't have the $6-7+ grand to spend on wedding photography to have to compromise on what they wanted. The Lauren Louise photography's unique style, our systems and all that. And so we decided to create wedding collections with our associate. There are still some pretty high-end collections for the associate because, of course, I hired somebody who's really good. And the way we do it is the associate has a similar shooting style to me. And so the associate shoots the wedding, but I'm still doing all of the editing. So you're still getting the style and the vibe and that super hands-on approach with our couples that you would get with me. And that's something that I was not willing to compromise on. I still wanted it to feel a lot like the Lauren Louise photography brand. And so, we actually, this is amazing. So I hired my associate, who I haven't technically introduced to the world yet, so I'm not going to say her name or anything.
Yeah, totally. Don't do that.
But I hired her last week or 2 weeks ago. And we actually already had a couple before I even hired the associate book an associate collection. So the couple reached out to me about a wedding date that I was already booked on. And I said, hey, I'm already booked, but I am hiring an associate in the next 2 weeks. If you want to wait until I hire the person, yada, yada. And they were like, nope, we love the Lauren Louise photography brand. We've been following your work forever. Here's the retainer. Let us know who you choose. We trust you. And that was like insane to me. I mean, I don't even know if I would do that for a photographer that I love. But to me, it was really telling of the system and the brands and sort of our approach and our philosophy to wedding photography that we've created. And I'm really proud of it.
That's awesome. That's super cool.
Yeah.
Was there any, I imagine that there's some awkwardness, like in just hiring an associate or like deciding to hire an associate, because there's just so many photographers out there, and I can't imagine like how many emails you got, if you will. Like, what's that process like? And again, like, was there anything you weren't willing to budge on when hiring an associate that you were like, hey, so look, I'm going to edit these and you're going to, how did you make those rules, if you will?
Sure. So we got about 30 applications, and I ended up interviewing 12 people. But before they came in for their interview and the job posting, everything was really clearly lined out. Of course, the people that we hire, including our assistants and our second shooters, always sign an agreement. But we were just looking for somebody who loved photography, who was good at it, not necessarily had a ton of. The person that we hired does not have a ton of wedding experience, but she takes really clean, sharp images and has a passion for wedding photography. And then there were a lot of wonderful applicants that we received, but so many people who just had this go-getter attitude that I knew in, 5 years they'd be, probably better than me moving on and, would end up with their own business. So I was just looking for somebody who wanted to be a part of a team, who had a little bit of learning left to do. They're going to start out as training with me on their first few winter weddings. And then they'll start to shoot for us, on their own for the brand.
That's awesome. How did you, decide that, are they being paid by you? Are they an official employee? Like, how did you decide to structure that?
Sure. No, they're paid by me. They're contracted by the Lauren Louise photography brand. And so they'll work for me. They of course, our associates are always welcome to shoot for themselves and to grow their own businesses. But when they're hired by me, they're working, they are spreading the Lauren Louise photography brand.
Sure. It's like swapping out the set of business cards that they carry. They're like, oh, this one, I have other business cards, Yeah. We're like, go to this website for me.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So have you done any advertising of this or anything like that, or just advertising at all, now that you've been in DC for 2 years?
Yeah. So I know people are going to hate me, but I actually don't. I don't advertise. You will see me listed on Junebug. But that's just because, I hate to say it, but people just love the Junebug name. And if you're listed as a Junebug wedding photographer, you kind of get like a little bit more clout.
And it matches your brand. Like there's nothing wrong with that. When I think of Junebug, I think of your kind of work.
Yes. But believe it or not, I don't get a ton of high paying leads from there, which is really interesting to me. On my inquiry form, when couples are interested in having me shoot their wedding, I ask them like, what's your realistic budget for photography? And most people that come from Junebug, when they say where they were referred from, they have a very low budget. So it's interesting to me because a lot of those Junebug weddings seem to be very high end. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I haven't really figured out. I haven't figured out what I'm going to do with them yet. But besides that, I don't actually. I just post Instagram regularly. I post to Facebook after a wedding. I actually did the math at the end of last year, and I found out that something like 65% of my couples were being referred by other couples. that I've worked for in the past, which isn't really surprising to me because, like I said, last year I worked really hard at creating a system that was referable, a referable experience for my couples. So I guess it worked. And then other than that, I get probably like 10 to 15% of my inquiries are from Instagram. Maybe 1 or 2 is from like a family member, but it's mostly referable.
That's awesome. So no Facebook advertising, nothing. That's
No.
crazy. That's awesome.
I know.
Very cool. I feel like that's like, a lot of people are diving into that, and it's fun to try, if you can know what you're doing, but
yeah. And that's the other thing. Like maybe at some point I would learn, but I haven't had to. And so I'm kind of like, just figure out what you need to know as you need to know it, and let sleeping dogs lie.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. That's cool. Is there anything else that you notice in the industry, or I always ask people like what pisses them off, honestly, or like what grinds your gears? Is there anything that you wish that people were better at, or something that you found that has really worked for you? I know you said systemization. Is there anything else that you're just like, I'm so glad I learned this, or do you have an accountant or anything like that? Like
Sure. I actually need a new accountant. So
who
taxes
doesn't?
are due today, and I'm not joking. I was prepared, December 12th with all of my information. I've been working with this accountant for a couple of years, and he just got back to me about my quarterly number today, and taxes are due tomorrow. So that's what I think about that. Get a good accountant is what I would say, because I need a new one. But
there you have it. That's your advice right there.
That's my advice. Get a good accountant. Yeah, I think that a lot of people who start new businesses, they get a little bit sort of stuck in the excitement, and they're like, oh my gosh, I just got a $5,000 check, for 2 weeks of work. Like, that's awesome. It's really exciting. But they don't think about like diversifying their income and their investments, and thinking about how to save for retirement. The other day I was thinking about, am I really going to be shooting weddings when I'm 55 years old?
Right.
Probably not. And so what are some ways, what are my plans, and what are my financial goals in order to be able to figure something out for then. And so, yeah, I mean, like, get a 401k, folks, or, set up an IRA, like, do something. Right. You have to think, it's not like you have a boss that's opening up or contributing to these accounts for you. You are your boss. So you need to be get ahead of those things.
Totally. And if it's like, if you can put in anything now, once a month, it can help out, over time. Compound interest is your friend.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Or you can always sign up for Bitcoin, get some Bitcoin,
Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started.
Oh no.
So, I know some people who have been doing that. I don't know. Again, like I said about like the learning to do Facebook investing, I'm like, I don't know how to do that. I'm not getting involved.
That's so funny. That's awesome. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Lauren, for being on and just kind of sharing a little bit of everything. And, like I said, I love your work. It's just the kind of work that you're just like, that's good. It's just,
thank you.
It's very good. And I love to hear about like the behind the scenes and the systems. And I'm sorry about the accountant, but
me too.
Awesome. We will link up your Instagram and website and everything in the show notes. And thanks so much for having on. We'll have to have you back on again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. Have a great week.
Such a fun episode to hang out with Lauren. She's hilarious, man. She's like so spunky. All the links to Instagram and her site are in the show notes. She's awesome. One thing of note, as you mentioned before, we would love to see an iTunes review of what you think of the show, this episode, maybe a few other episodes, like whatever you think. Would love to hear your thoughts, and you can share an iTunes review. That would be amazing. So thank you so much for listening to the Bearded Tog. We're back next week. Have a wonderful day.